Well, I wanted to throw something Shanna's way on the topic of morality, and it can flow out over this. But in terms of your deistic outlook, you have certain beliefs about God in relation to the universe, and I'm assuming that you draw those beliefs from the type of universe we live in. You've come to certain beliefs from what you see around you. To what degree, what is the level, I guess, of specificity or the, like for instance, we're talking about morals, we're talking about complex human interactions. Um, do, do you see your God, do you see the manifestation that you believe in terms of God? And I'm sure you're probably skittish about really getting into particulars because it's hard to draw out properties from afar like that. But in terms of human interactions, do you see it having? Do you draw those? Do you infer God from the complexities that you see in terms of morality and Homo sapiens and their interactions as a species? Like, does it, or is it more about the larger structures that you and that this is just consequence of God kind of setting things in motion?
So you're asking me about morality, and there seem to be a couple different points and
It,
questions in there.
it doesn't have to be specifically about morality, but it's about the complexities that you witness on this local level. I could see it one of two ways. I could see somebody having a deistic belief where they feel that this creation event occurred from an intelligent God who has creates these structures, and that whatever results of that is going to be interesting. It's going to have some structure to it, but the nuanced things that occur within that aren't necessarily the goal of the God, or they're not the that God wasn't purposing those things to occur. They just occurred because of the larger act. Or it could be the case that while the God is not personal, directed things in such a way that these interactions would take place on a planet called Earth spinning around a star we call the sun. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. I tend to lean more towards the morality that we have, or everything that we have, is just a consequence of the way things were made. It had to be the case. Since it was going to be made X, Y and Z must follow. Does that make sense? And does that in any way answer your question?
No, no. So what you might say is that the complexity that you see within us is the complexity you'd expect from the universe in general. That God set things in motion and cool stuff happened. But he
Right.
wasn't aiming to have he wasn't aiming to have Homo sapiens having social interactions on Earth. That was just part of like you'd say it's all complex and all interesting.
Right. Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on what this thing was aiming for, whether it was aiming for social creatures like we are, being aware of ourselves and aware that we're aware, and then aware that we're aware that we're aware. I kind of go back and forth on that. Sometimes I don't think that, I just think it's a consequence. And then there's other times I think that it was intentional. But I go back and forth a lot on that one. So I guess I lean more towards just, everything is what it is just by virtue of how it was made.
It would seem if
Does
it
that make
was
sense?
yeah, it would seem like if it ever shifted towards intentionality towards these things that would move you. You might not want to move towards a personal God, but it would seem like it would have consequence, or you would be able to appreciate the consequences of what these things would undergo, or how these things would, like as soon as it's aware of these things that can feel pain, and pain is not a great thing. It may not care, but it's certainly a different God than the God that happened to end up with social creatures who can feel pain. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if when I go down that road, I end up with, it's a little more complicated, right? Because then I do have to think, okay, does this God, understand that we're going to be in pain, that we're going to suffer? Does it even care? Is it even capable of caring, right? And then that kind of loops me back around to a circle, because I think that the emotions and the morals that we have, again, are just by virtue of the kind of creatures that we are. And if that's the case, then I can't assign any kind of emotions or morals or any of that to this God, to this creator or whatever it is, because we only have them by virtue of what we are, and it's not us. So how could it have them as well, right? You know, anger and sadness and love and happiness is all serve purposes, and you know, with the as far as the social dynamic goes. How would that work for a god? I can't quite bridge that gap.
Well,
so, but I don't know that it would have the kind of consequences where if we were intentional, that then I would have to kind of rethink. I don't know if you were leaning towards this or not, so I could be wrong. Correct me if I am, but like towards a revealed kind of God, because those two things aren't the same to me. It's not like if this God had intentions and if this God meant for us to be exactly as we are, then it must be one of the religions, because that's nonsense. That doesn't follow at all.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't leaning. I was just trying to figure out where your head is at with it.
It's all over the place. It's a lot of fun.
Well, one way that you could posit a creator God that has emotions and feelings and things like that, like us, is and thoughts, right? You have to ask yourself, you know, every organism that has thoughts, right? Every organism where we can detect and properly ascribe that it has thoughts and feelings and emotions and things like that, desires and intentions and goals and stuff like that. It's always because it serves some reproductive interest. Plants don't seem to be afraid to be grazed upon, and bacteria don't seem to have the sorts of motivations that we do. But you can look at some organisms, they're rather simple, and you can posit plausibly that they feel hunger, they might feel fear, they can feel lust and stuff like that, and other organisms can feel more and more things like what we like to think we can feel and stuff like that. You can sort of imagine this along a phylogenetic scale, right? But I mean, organisms have minds for a reason, right? Plants don't have to be. Plants are rooted. They can't move. They can't just take up and So what's the point of being afraid if you're a plant? You can't avoid your predators, right? And what's the point of having all kinds of thoughts in your head if you can never communicate them, and you can't do anything because you're a plant? You're just fixed there, right? What is the point of having any thoughts, right? We understand why organisms have thoughts, right? To go about the business of surviving. We understand why creatures have beliefs, right? A map of reality, because having a map of reality allows you to act in a way that is appropriate to the changing circumstances of your environment, right? But if you're something like a plant and you're fixed there, well, what are you going to do with, a brain on a plant is as useless as tits on a bull, right? It just doesn't need that kind of neurophysiology. So nature is not going to select anything like that. So there's simply no point. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, but why does a god need thoughts? Why does a god have emotions and stuff like that? We know what these are for, socially and personally, how they're geared to individual and social survival. But what does a god, a creator, need that? Well, maybe the god in question that created our universe is a social creature, one of many, right? Maybe he is part of a pantheon of millions of gods, right? Okay. Now, of course, this beggars the question, well, wait, where did those come from? Were there selective pressures that acting on those gods? Well, maybe, and people will say, oh, well, then it's not an ultimate solution. Okay, so what if it's not an ultimate solution? I don't need an ultimate solution, ultimate solution to explain how this world came about. If I had reasons to think that such a creature existed, then I have reasons for thinking that creature exists. That by creature I mean the creator, right? If such a being exists, then I have reason for thinking that it exists, right? I don't have to answer every question about that being, okay? But I think it is a problem for anyone who posits a creator. You have to explain, why does it have any thoughts and feelings and desires and interests or emotions at all? What are they for? Why does it have them, right? So.
No, I don't like that.
You know, like I think it's an important question. You have to ask. I mean, we have some sense of why we have them, right?
Right. But I mean, like you said a second ago, when somebody's asking that kind of question, the answer is we're trying to answer the question about what happened with this universe. How did this universe come to be? How did this come about, right?
Yep.
So if I answer that question, and then it's like, okay, but you don't know X, Y, Z. Well, I don't have access to that information.
That's fine. Yeah.
So at that point, I'm playing the guessing game, which is fine. There's a lot of room for that, and forming hypotheses about these kind of things. That's fine, but you can't go much further than that because I don't have access to the relevant information. I don't have access to the entire data set to make those kind of conclusions.
Right, but the reason I brought up things like plants is because positing a creator, a sole creator, right? Because but the argument that's used is some kind of parsimony. I'm just going to posit one God, one creator, because I want to be parsimonious. You know, Occam's razor. I don't want to posit a committee of creators. I want to posit one. I'm just going to sort of limit myself. I want to reduce the number of assumptions that I'm making here. So if I'm going to posit anything, I want to, you know, the machinery of my theory here has to be as simple as possible. So I'm going to limit to just one creator. Okay. But if you're limiting it to one, well, wait a minute. Now this is a problem. Why does this thing have the emotions that would make sense if it were a social creature? Then it would make sense that it has pro-social emotions, right?
Right,
like concern and sympathy and stuff like that, and love. Right?
That's if the person that's describing the God also ascribes those kind of characteristics to that God.
Right. You don't have to. That's right. You don't have to. Not everyone would, right? That's why I think if I were a deist, I would say, no, this is a creature. This is a being without feelings. You know, we have feelings, and there's a reason why we have feelings. There's a causal story to be told for why we have feelings. That thing wouldn't have feelings, as far as I can tell, if there's only one of it. Right? There'd be no reason for it.
Then it very well could.
Then it could, yeah.
But it might not even be emotions or feelings in the way that we view them.
No, they could be vastly different. But to the extent that it makes sense to speak of feelings and thoughts and desires and intentions and interests and stuff like that, to the extent that it makes sense to talk about those things, even analogically, about such a being, then there has to be some resemblance between whatever experiences it's having and our experiences. If they're not relevantly the same, then there's no point in using the term, right? I mean, it's just a bad analogy. It's just bad poetry, right?
Right.
Well,
which is typically what it ends up being.
I mean, Christians do, have, gods that the God has emotions attributed to him. He has anger, he has laughter, he has grief, he has love, hate, jealousy, joy. These are things that are attributed to God, but even most Christian theologians acknowledge that he might experience emotion very differently than we do, and so like these are almost descriptions based for our benefit so that we can find him relatable in some way, but he might not function like we do. I don't know.
I don't see how that would be. I don't see how that would work, because he's given these descriptions, like these, emotions or moods or whatever, and then he acts on them in a way that we understand. Right, like he's jealous, have no other gods before him kind of thing, and then he acts out, he's wrathful, he does, it makes sense, like you can tell a story with it, like, oh, he's jealous, he does X, oh, he's mad, he does, it's not like we call the emotion one thing and then his actions make no sense to us.
Yeah, it's to the extent that having those emotions would explain his behavior and his attitudes, right?
Right.
That we posit them. It makes no sense. I mean, this is one of the objections I have to Christians who try to sort of say, well, we're merely anthropomorphizing and personifying God here when we use these terms, these descriptions of a mental life akin to ours and an emotional life akin to ours. I think that's really trying to have it both ways. That is really sort of trying to have your reason and eat it too. It simply doesn't make sense to say that God has feelings that are like our feelings, but they're completely unlike our feelings, and we have no business ascribing them. We either have some business ascribing them because there's something that he feels that is like what we feel, or else we just got to shut up and stop using this language. We are misdescribing this, and this is not our attempt to describe. This is, we are told, the divinely inspired description of God. This comes from the creator of the universe itself. Okay? So it would seem that the creator of the universe himself has inspired what, according to these apologists, are saying is a manifestly, self-admittedly terrible description of this God. Right? I don't know what to make of that. That apologetic strikes me as casuistry, and I have no time for that.
I have something to say. It's very important. Did you say you can't have your cake and eat it too?
No, I said you can't have your reason and eat it too.
Okay, but so this is okay, fine. As long as you didn't say cake, because that makes no sense to me. At what point, under what circumstances, is it okay to give somebody a cake and they can't eat it? That's a bullshit thing.
Diabetic, right there.
But you wouldn't give them a cake. And you wouldn't give them a cake.
You would if your purpose wasn't good.
Use your cake, jackass. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to cuss here?
Yeah. Oh no.
I don't know. Last time I
already
said the
said
C word
tits.
50 times.
I already said tits, so.
Okay. But you can't have your cake and eat it too means you can't eat your cake and still expect to have it.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't.
That makes sense.
You can't
That's
have
what
your-
it means.
Right.
You
Can't
can't
eat
eat your cake and still have it, is what it
Then
means.
it should be said in that order, because
I
the other
agree.
part makes no sense. These are the things I think about. Welcome to my world.